So once you've given some consideration to these general issues, you then need to set out your own research questions and to think about what's going to be the most appropriate in answering those questions. So at this point, I think it's going to be helpful to give you a few examples. If your research question involves working with large numbers of individuals, or if you're trying to get an overview of the topic where you're trying to generalize, or if you're looking at rather complex questions which require predictions, so does one variable have a predictive effect on another variable, for example. All of these sorts of questions are going to be most appropriate for quantitative methodology. Alternatively, your questions may be more focused around a small and specialized sample of individuals. Rather than trying to give an overview of a topic, you might be wanting to explore in depth, perhaps a new area of research, or just perhaps something where you want to really get a more detailed understanding and a deeper insight into a certain issue. And in these cases, a qualitative approach would be more appropriate. So just to illustrate this with an example, say you were working with an organisation and you wanted to explore the impact of a new policy or a new procedure that had been implemented within that organisation. There are different ways that you could approach that. So one way might be to decide that you would like to get an overview of that topic. So you would like to ask a number of individuals, as many as possible within that organisation, how they feel towards certain aspects of that policy. And if this was the case, then you would probably be looking at implementing quantitative approaches. However, rather than taking an overview, you could decide that you're more interested in exploring in depth in a smaller number of employees how they think and how they feel about that policy, in which case a qualitative approach could be taken. The qualitative approach is obviously allowing you to explore these issues in much more depth and allowing you to gain more detailed information. However, because you will therefore be using a smaller, more specialised sample, you will have to give some thought to the impact on the generalisability of these results. Okay, so the message that I'm trying to get across here is that each approach has its own advantages and its own disadvantages. And what's important is that you're basing your decision on what's most appropriate to your own piece of research and the questions that you're trying to answer. So what you might find useful is to take a structured approach to this, and once you've got your research questions set out, try to think of alternative ways of answering those questions. So if you were to use a quantitative approach, what would be some of the advantages and some of the disadvantages? Similarly, if you were to use a qualitative approach to answer those questions, are there different strengths and different weaknesses, and which is going to be most appropriate for your own particular piece of research? Now, some of you may be wondering why this podcast seems to be focusing on qualitative versus quantitative approaches, rather than considering how these two different types of data can perhaps be mixed to provide a mixed methods approach to your research. Now, certainly there are many advantages to taking this kind of approach. Sometimes mixing a data set can allow us to get a better understanding of the issue at hand, because it allows us to not only look in depth using qualitative techniques, but then also to look across a greater number of individuals using more quantitative approaches. Now, the reason that I haven't focused specifically on mixed methods here is because when you come to look at your dissertation, it's unlikely that you will be looking to take a mixed methods approach, purely because of the amount of time that you have to complete your master's projects, and it's better to stay realistic about what you can achieve during this time. However, if you do decide that you want to take a mixed methods approach, then my advice to you would be to make sure that this is going to be necessary and appropriate in order to achieve your aims, and to make sure that it is actually adding something to use both of these different approaches. I would also suggest that you think very carefully about the reasons why you're using both and how you're going to combine the different types of data. So it's not just about the fact that you will be collecting qualitative and quantitative evidence, it's also how you're going to analyse that, how the two are going to be linked into each other, and how you're then going to write that up. So with mixed methods approaches, there are a number of things that you need to consider. So whether we're gathering qualitative or quantitative evidence, there are a number of different methods that you can use in order to gather that data. We're certainly not restricted to using only surveys or interviews. However, because these methods tend to be the ones that are most frequently used, certainly by master's students, those are the ones that the rest of the podcasts within this mini-series will focus on to provide you with a little bit more information about gathering evidence using these particular methods.